I am Amelia Moore, 29 years old. They say weddings are supposed to be about love, about two people starting there forever. But when I walked into my sister's $200,000 wedding, it didn't feel like love was the centerpiece. It felt like a coronation. My sister, the golden child, stood there dripping in diamonds and lace with every single detail around her screaming perfection. The flowers, the chandeliers, the champagne towers. It was like walking onto the set of a movie. And I couldn't help but think, wow, they really pulled out all the stops for her. Because for me, there were never stops to pull. From the time we were kids, my sister always got the spotlight. If she sneezed, my parents rushed over with tissues and sympathy. If I got sick, I was told to toughen up. If she won a participation trophy, it was framed and hung in the living room. When I actually earned awards, academic ones, things I'd worked my heart out for, they were tossed on a shelf, barely acknowledged. But standing there at her wedding, watching my parents beam as if they'd raised royalty, something inside me twisted. The entire ballroom was glowing with their pride, their money, their effort. And I thought about all the times they had looked at me with nothing but indifference. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about years of being told, silently but clearly, you don't matter as much as she does. Let me paint the picture for you. My sister had a 10-tier cake, flown in from some famous bakery 2 states away. Her dress wasn't just designer, it was custom-made. My parents bragged for months about it costing more than some people's annual salaries. Guests were handed little gift bags that probably cost more than the dresses half of us wore. They even hired a live orchestra for the ceremony. Meanwhile, when I graduated college, the first in our family to do it, my parents didn't throw me a party, not even dinner. My mom literally said, "We'll celebrate properly when your sister's big day comes." I thought she meant her wedding. I didn't realize she meant every big day would always belong to my sister. And maybe you're wondering, well, wasn't she at least kind about it? Did she ever share the spotlight? No. My sister leaned into being the golden child. She thrived on it. She knew she was the favorite, and she played the role perfectly, the sparkling daughter, the apple of their eye. And me? I was the stagehand behind the curtains, making sure her show went off without a hitch. I remember once in high school I had worked for months on a science project. I made it all the way to the regional finals. My parents didn't come. They were too busy taking my sister dress shopping for prom. When I came home with the certificate, proud and exhausted, they barely looked at it. But when she walked down the stairs in her prom dress later that week, they cried. They literally cried over her dress. That's the kind of family dynamic I grew up in. So standing there in that glittering ballroom, I wasn't just watching her wedding. I was watching years of favoritism come to life in front of me, bigger and shinier than ever before. It was like my childhood had been magnified into a single event. My parents didn't just want my sister to feel special. They wanted the whole world to know she was their pride and joy. And me? I was just another guest. I'll admit something. Part of me wanted to disappear that night, to just fade into the wallpaper to avoid the constant reminder that I was only there to fill a seat and clap politely. But another part of me, a quieter part that had been building for years, refused to let the silence swallow me anymore. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew something inside me was shifting. Because here's the thing. When you've been ignored long enough, when your voice has been dismissed over and over again, there comes a moment where silence stops feeling safe. It starts to feel like suffocation. And that night, watching my parents parade my sister like a prize, I realized I had been suffocating for years. The irony is, my parents didn't even notice me slip into those thoughts. Why would they? They were too busy laughing with her, posing for pictures, thanking guests for coming to celebrate their daughter. Not daughters. Just her. Always her. As I sat there, watching the spectacle unfold, I thought back to every missed birthday, every forgotten achievement, every moment I swallowed my feelings just to keep the peace. And something inside me whispered, enough. That whisper would grow louder in the days that followed. It would turn into words I never thought I'd have the courage to say out loud, and it would all begin with a speech that nobody saw coming. But that night, at the start, I was just the invisible sibling in a $200,000 fairy tale, silently realizing my story wasn't going to stay silent much longer. They say patterns don't lie. And in my family, the pattern was crystal clear. My sister sparkled, and I was invisible. If you lined up all the photos in our house, you'd think we only had one child. My sister's face filled the walls, smiling at dance recitals, twirling in princess costumes, blowing out candles on cakes that could have fed an army. My photos? You'd be lucky to find a stray school picture shoved into the corner of a frame. It wasn't just about the walls. It was about how those walls echoed. When she laughed, the house roared with joy. When I cried, the silence was deafening. I'll never forget one birthday in particular. I was turning 10, double digits, a milestone for any kid. I'd invited a few friends over, made a little list of games, even helped decorate because I was so excited. But the day of the party, my mom pulled me aside with a tight smile and said, "Sweetie, we'll have to keep it small. Your sister has her ballet showcase tomorrow, and we need to save our energy." Save our energy. That was the story of my life. Instead of a party, I got a store-bought cake from the clearance shelf and a happy birthday half-sung. Because everyone was too busy ironing my sister's tutu and rehearsing her routine in the living room. My friends never came, because my parents forgot to send out the invitations. I blew out the candles alone, staring at frosting that was already starting to crack. But you know what's funny? The very next day, after my sister's performance, there was a huge dinner with relatives, balloons, flowers, the works. Not for me, for her. My birthday had become her after party. Moments like that weren't rare. They were the rhythm of my childhood. When I brought home straight A's, my dad barely looked up from the newspaper. But when my sister passed a math test, not even with a great grade, just passed, he acted like she'd won a Nobel Prize. They took her out for ice cream while I sat at home finishing the chores. When I tried out for soccer and actually made the team, my mom said, "That's nice," before launching into a full conversation about my sister's hair appointment. And when I scored my first goal in a game, neither of them were there. They were across town, clapping for her cheerleading squad. Every achievement of mine was measured against her, and always found lacking. The worst part wasn't the neglect itself. It was how they disguised it as fairness. Anytime I dared to speak up, I was met with the same condescending tone. "We do our best for both of you. Don't make this about competition." But it was always competition. I just wasn't allowed to compete. By the time I hit my teenage years, I had learned the unspoken rules. Keep quiet, stay out of the way, don't expect too much. My sister was the star. I was the supporting role, the understudy who never got to perform. One memory sticks out like a scar. It was prom season. My parents had spent weeks helping my sister shop for dresses, shoes, accessories. They even booked her a professional makeup artist. I, on the other hand, didn't even have a dress. When I finally asked if they could help me buy one, my mom sighed and said, "You don't really need to go, do you? It's not your thing." Not my thing. That phrase burned. Because the truth was, I wanted it to be my thing. I wanted to dress up, to dance, to feel like maybe for one night I mattered. Instead, I borrowed a dress from a friend at the last minute, went alone, and left before midnight. It wasn't just prom. It was college applications. When my acceptance letter came, a moment I'd dreamed of for years, I stood in the kitchen holding that envelope, heart pounding, waiting for them to react. My mom skimmed it and said, "That's great. We'll talk about tuition later." My dad didn't even look up. But when my sister announced her engagement years later, the house exploded with celebration, champagne, hugs, squeals of joy. That moment was their lottery win. My acceptance letter? Just a bill they didn't want to pay. Looking back, I realized every missed clap, every forgotten cheer, every shrug at my milestones. It was all training. Training me to believe that I didn't deserve applause, that I didn't deserve love, attention, or recognition. And maybe for a long time, I believed them. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was strong enough to not need their validation. But the truth? It left cracks. Cracks that widened with every dismissal, every smirk, every pat on the shoulder that was supposed to replace the hug I really needed. By the time my sister's $200,000 wedding rolled around, those cracks were ready to split wide open. Because when you've been ignored long enough, your silence isn't just silence. It's a scream waiting to be heard. And that scream? Mine was about to come out in the form of words no one expected me to say. They say weddings are about love, but when I walked into my sister's $200,000 fairy tale celebration, all I could see was money. Money that screamed who was valued and who was not. The chandeliers sparkled, dripping in crystals. White roses lined every aisle, their scent almost suffocating in its sweetness. The ballroom was transformed into something you'd see in a movie. Grand, flawless, intoxicating. And yet, as I stood there, in my modest dress bought with my own paycheck, I felt like an intruder in a kingdom that was never mine. I'd prepared myself for it. I told myself not to compare, not to measure my worth against the towering cake or the designer gown. But the moment I saw my parents, beaming, glowing, practically floating on air, the cracks in my armor split wide open. These were the same parents who told me there wasn't enough money for me to go to the college I'd earned my way into. The same ones who told me prom wasn't my thing, who brushed off birthdays, graduations, and every milestone I'd fought for. And yet here they were, writing blank checks for imported champagne and a 12-piece orchestra. The hypocrisy burned hotter than the candles flickering on every table. As guests poured in, family friends, distant cousins, colleagues I'd never even met, I watched how everyone treated my sister like royalty. Compliments poured in like rain. "You look stunning. This is the wedding of the century. Your parents must be so proud." That last one stung the most. Proud. The word I had chased my whole life, dangling like a prize I would never claim. I tried to blend into the background, but humiliation has a way of finding you even when you stay quiet. At one point, as I was slipping past a group of relatives near the dessert table, I overheard them whispering, "She looks plain next to her sister, don't you think?" Well, you know she never really turned out the same, not like the golden child. Honestly, I didn't even think she'd come. Their words sliced deeper than they knew. I wanted to scream, to tell them they didn't know half the story. But instead, I bit my lip until it bled, forcing myself to keep walking. And then came the speeches. The best man spoke, the maid of honor cried, the parents glowed with pride. Each word was another reminder of the gap, the chasm, between how they celebrated her and how they ignored me. When my dad took the microphone, his voice shook with emotion. From the day she was born, we knew she was destined for something special. She has always been the light of this family, and today, she shines brighter than ever. I felt the air leave my lungs. The light of the family. And what was I? The shadow? The void? The reminder of what they never wanted? My mom followed, adding, "We couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become. You've brought us endless joy." Endless joy. The same woman who had brought me endless silence. I clapped politely, but inside, the dam was breaking. Every birthday they forgot, every milestone they skipped, every moment they chose her over me. It all pulsed through my veins like fire. By the time the microphone was passed toward me, my hands were trembling. It wasn't even planned. I wasn't supposed to speak. But someone, maybe out of politeness, maybe out of pity, asked if I wanted to say a few words. And before I could stop myself, I was standing. The room shifted. The eyes turned toward me, expectant but dismissive, like they didn't think I could possibly have anything worth saying. I caught my sister's smirk, a smug little twist of her lips that said, "This is my day, don't ruin it." And in that moment, something inside me hardened. I wasn't just going to speak, I was going to be heard. But I didn't start right away. No, I let the silence build, stretching it until the air grew heavy and people began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. My heart pounded, but my voice, when it finally came, was steady. "I don't usually get asked to give speeches at family events," I began, my tone sharp enough to slice through the tension. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the crowd, but I didn't smile. Most of you know my sister as the star, the golden child. And tonight, everything about this wedding proves just how much she shines. Compliments, right? That's what they thought. But underneath my words, there was a current of bitterness, strong enough to pull the room under. I continued, weaving memories into my sentences, carefully, deliberately. The birthdays that were postponed, the graduations they skipped, the celebrations that were always hers, never mine. I framed it all as contrast, not accusations, not yet, but shadows cast by the glowing spotlight they had always reserved for her. By now, the smirk had vanished from my sister's face. My parents shifted uncomfortably at the head table. The relatives leaned in, sensing the storm that was gathering. I let my voice dip, softer, almost breaking. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. That I didn't need the cheers, the applause, the recognition. But standing here in this glittering room that must have cost more than my entire education, I realized it always mattered. It always hurt. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. And that was the hook. The moment the entire room leaned in, breathless, waiting for what would come next. Because what they didn't know was that I wasn't finished. Not even close. When I finally looked up from the microphone, I saw dozens of eyes staring back at me. Wide, curious, some even nervous. My hands were still trembling, but my voice had found its strength, steadying with each word. I took a breath, and then I let it all out. You know, I said, my tone sharper now, people always talk about how weddings are a celebration of love, family, and unity. But for me, this moment is something else entirely. It's a reminder of everything I've never been given. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. My mother's hand froze on her wine glass, my father's jaw tightened, and my sister shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I pressed on. When I graduated high school with honors, I looked out into the crowd for my parents. Do you know who I saw? No one. They said they were busy. When I got accepted into college, they told me there wasn't enough money. But tonight, I gestured toward the glittering hall, the overflowing flowers, the endless rows of champagne flutes. Tonight, it seems money was never really the problem. The room grew heavy, like the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. I celebrated my birthdays alone more times than I can count. Sometimes I didn't even get a phone call. Meanwhile, my sister's birthdays, they were full-scale productions year after year, a reminder that she was the child worth celebrating. Gasps whispered through the room now, relatives exchanging stunned glances. My parents tried to smile, tried to wave it off as me being dramatic, but their faces were pale. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. This isn't about jealousy. It's about being invisible in my own family. It's about watching my parents beam with pride every time she breathed, while I had to claw for scraps of attention. It's about knowing that no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough. I paused deliberately, letting the words settle. My chest was tight, but for the first time I felt lighter, like I wasn't suffocating under their silence anymore. And then, I went for the truth they couldn't hide behind smiles or excuses. You told me once, Dad, on my birthday no less, not to expect anyone to show. Do you remember that? Those words stayed with me. They branded me. And yet here I stand, in front of all these people, showing up for a family that never showed up for me. The entire hall went still. My father's face drained of color. My mother's eyes darted to the floor. My sister tried to interrupt, but her voice faltered, drowned out by the weight of the silence. I gripped the microphone tighter and leaned forward. So tonight, I'm not here to make you proud. I'm not here to smile politely and fade into the background like always. Tonight, I am here to say out loud what everyone has been too polite to admit. Favoritism destroys families. And in this one, it destroyed me. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded ever so slightly, as if they had seen it too, but never dared to name it. I caught the eye of an older cousin in the back, someone who had once whispered to me at a reunion, "I don't know how you do it. They never treat you the same." That cousin's eyes were wet now, nodding as if to say, "Finally." Someone said it. My voice cracked then, but I didn't hide it. I wanted so badly to belong. I wanted to believe I was loved the same way, even when every sign told me otherwise. And the saddest part is, I kept hoping that one day you'd look at me the way you look at her. But that day never came. By now, my sister's face was flushed red, her perfect smile shattered. My mother's hands were trembling in her lap, and my father sat stiff, his pride bleeding out into the carpet beneath his chair. I straightened my shoulders. So tonight I'm done hoping. I'm done waiting. I'm done being invisible. Because after this, you won't be able to ignore me. Not anymore. The room was silent, not just quiet, but heavy, breathless, as if everyone was afraid to even move. And then I did something that sealed the moment. I set the microphone down slowly, deliberately, and walked back to my seat without looking at them again. The clinking of glasses didn't resume, the chatter didn't return. The celebration, the flawless illusion of the perfect family, had cracked right down the middle. For once, I wasn't the shadow in the room. I was the storm that had blown the doors off their perfect little kingdom. And as I sat down, heart still racing, I realized something. For the first time in my life, they had heard me. Really heard me. It didn't erase the years of neglect. It didn't undo the silence. But it shattered the lie they had built. The lie that their golden child was the only one who mattered, and that I would always stay quiet. No, not anymore. This was only the beginning. The silence after my speech was louder than any applause could have been. It clung to the walls, stretched across the tables, and weighed heavy on every single guest. For the first time in my life, they were the ones left scrambling for words, not me. I sat down slowly, my legs trembling, my heart still hammering in my chest. My hands were clammy, but there was a fire burning inside me that steadied my spine. I had done it. I had spoken out loud what I had swallowed for years. But almost immediately, the fallout began. "Unbelievable," my sister hissed, her voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. She leaned toward me, her perfectly painted face twisted in rage. "How dare you ruin my wedding?" I met her glare head-on. For once, I didn't look away. "How dare you think I'd keep quiet forever?" Gasps erupted again. Some relatives averted their eyes, others leaned forward as if they'd been waiting for this showdown their entire lives. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This isn't the time or place for your theatrics," she snapped, her voice quivering despite her attempt at control. "You should be ashamed of yourself." I laughed. It wasn't bitter. It was hollow. Ashamed? I've spent my whole life drowning in shame that wasn't mine. Tonight, I returned it to its rightful owners. My father stayed seated, but his jaw was clenched so tightly it looked painful. His silence was telling. He had nothing to defend himself with. Not anymore. Then it happened. A cousin, one of the quieter ones, cleared her throat. "She's right," she said softly, almost apologetically at first. "We've all seen it, the way you treat her like she doesn't exist. It's been obvious for years." The words hit the air like a hammer. Heads turned. My mother's eyes widened in disbelief. My sister gasped dramatically, and my father finally looked up. But the tide had shifted. Another uncle spoke next, louder. "I always wondered why you never showed up for her milestones. But you were front row for every one of your other daughters. You think people don't notice?" The room buzzed. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. The family's dirty secret, the favoritism they had wrapped in denial and excuses, was spilling out like wine across the pristine white tablecloths. And there they were. My parents, shrinking under the weight of the truth. The same parents who had made me feel so small for so long now looked like children being scolded in front of the whole family. My sister, still desperate to salvage her perfect day, tried again. "This is my wedding. She's just jealous. She couldn't stand that I'm the one who—" "Enough." My voice cut through hers, strong, unwavering. "Jealousy doesn't explain why my parents left me alone in the hospital when I needed them most. Jealousy doesn't explain why they told me not to expect anyone to show for my birthday. That's not jealousy. That's neglect. That's cruelty." The guests shifted again. Sympathy was no longer hidden. People looked at me differently now, not as the bitter sibling, not as the invisible shadow, but as someone who had survived years of quiet suffering and finally had the courage to speak it out loud. My mother, her hands shaking, tried one last time. "We did the best we could." The words fell flat. They sounded flimsy, almost pathetic. compared to the reality everyone had just heard. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. No, you did the best for her. You chose favorites, and you left me with scars I'll carry forever. That's not parenting. That's betrayal. The finality of my words settled over the room. My parents sat frozen, unable to claw their way back from the truth. My sister fumed, her day unraveling in front of her, but no one was rushing to comfort her anymore. The narrative had shifted. The illusion had shattered. And for me, the tightness in my chest, the weight I had carried since childhood, loosened. It wasn't gone, not completely, but for the first time I could breathe. I hadn't just been heard, I had been seen. The rest of the evening was chaos. Whispers, half-finished meals, relatives avoiding eye contact with my parents, some even coming to squeeze my hand in quiet solidarity. My parents retreated into themselves, their laughter gone, their power over me cracked open like a hollow shell. And though my sister tried to keep the party alive, the energy had shifted permanently. The perfect wedding she had dreamed of, the flawless day my parents had poured everything into, had been marked, not by her vows, but by my voice. It was messy. It was raw. It was not the storybook ending they wanted. But for me, it was the beginning of my freedom. The night after my sister's wedding, I lay awake replaying everything in my mind. For once, it wasn't regret or self-blame looping in my head. It was relief. I had spoken the truth, and there was no way to put it back in the box. The following weeks only confirmed it. Whispers turned into open conversations. Relatives who had once stayed silent reached out to me. Some apologized for not stepping in sooner. Others admitted they had been afraid of my parents' wrath. I didn't expect it, but their words stitched something back together in me. Something my parents had ripped apart long ago. Validation. My parents, on the other hand, were unraveling. Their shiny facade, the image they had spent years curating, had cracked beyond repair. Invitations to family gatherings stopped arriving for them. My mother's sharp tongue was no longer respected, only pitied. My father's silence no longer looked dignified. It looked weak. And my sister? Her perfect wedding became a family cautionary tale. No one remembered her grand decorations or expensive dress. They remembered the moment her sister stood up, told the truth, and left the room in stunned silence. At first, I thought justice ended there, in the shift of perception, in the way the power dynamic had finally tilted. But justice had one more chapter. A few months later, I was contacted by an aunt who had been executor of my late grandmother's estate. She had been waiting for the right moment to reveal what she knew, that my parents had quietly redirected funds meant for me into accounts for my sister. Money my grandmother had intended for my education, my future. Gone. Stolen. Hearing it confirmed what I had always felt but never been able to prove. My anger boiled, but this time I didn't drown in it. I used it. I hired a lawyer. I gathered every document, every piece of evidence. My aunt stood by me. And this time I didn't walk into a room alone. I walked into court. The day of the hearing felt surreal. My parents, once towering figures who dictated every part of my life, now sat across from me in stiff suits, their eyes darting nervously. My sister, for once, wasn't the center of attention. She sat off to the side, pale, quiet, powerless. When my lawyer presented the evidence, my parents collapsed under its weight. Papers don't lie. Bank statements don't play favorites. And when the judge turned to them, asking for an explanation, their excuses sounded as hollow in that courtroom as they had at the wedding. The ruling was clear. What was taken from me would be returned. Their manipulation, their betrayal, was finally documented in black and white, sealed with the authority they couldn't twist to their will. As I walked out of that courtroom, the sunlight hit me differently. For years, I had been the child left behind in the hospital, the girl told not to expect anyone to show up, the daughter invisible in her own family. But that day, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. Justice doesn't erase scars. It doesn't give me back the birthdays, the milestones, the moments of love I should have had. But it gave me something else. The closure that comes from finally being heard, from finally standing tall, from finally refusing to be silent. My parents? They lost more than money. They lost the loyalty, the respect, the power they had wielded so carelessly. My sister? She learned that favoritism doesn't shield you forever. And me? I learned that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't rage or destruction. It's simply reclaiming what was stolen and walking away free. To this day, people still ask me how I found the courage to speak out at that wedding, to stand in that courtroom. The truth is, I didn't feel courageous at all. I felt tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of swallowing pain. Tired of watching injustice rule unchecked. But here's the secret no one tells you. Sometimes tired is enough. Tired is the match that lights the fire. Tired is the push that finally gets you to your feet. So if you've ever been made to feel like the forgotten one, the scapegoat, the invisible child in your own family, know this. Your silence isn't permanent. Your story matters. And your justice will come, even if it takes time. Because in the end, my parents left me alone in the hospital. But in court, when the truth finally came crashing down, they were the ones who collapsed. And I finally walked out whole. If this story struck a chord with you, if you've ever felt invisible or overlooked, you are not alone. Like this video if you've ever wished someone would listen. Share it with anyone who might need courage to speak their truth. And subscribe for more stories, because every voice deserves to be heard.